I'm Captain Cliff, and you're listening to the History of Aviation podcast.
Well, here we are again for another episode of the History of Aviation podcast. I'm Derrick Beeler. Thank you to all of our listeners, first off, for being dedicated to this and being an aviation enthusiast and having the emotion towards it and supporting this podcast. We can't tell you how much we appreciate it. We got a good one for today, a very interesting one. But before we dive in, let's start with the crew. Will D, how you doing, bud?
Fantastic as always, ready to go.
Always ready. Shae Jones, producer extraordinaire, turning all the buttons, twisting all the knobs, muting us when we need to be muted. How's it going, Shae?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm doing good. Willie, you and I did this at the same time. Did you notice that?
I
did. I'm happy to be here, man. Always.
Good stuff. Julien Martinson, how are you doing?
Hey guys, thank you for having me on the podcast today. I'm doing well, and it's truly a pleasure to be invited on the History of Aviation and to contribute to this exciting podcast.
And Julien, I pick on you specifically for this podcast because I've been a passenger on a lot of flights, and we want to get to our destination, man. We want to get down to Destin, Florida from Tennessee, and we want to just get there. So on the previous episode, Will mentioned we all jump on looking like Jimmy Buffett, right? And we just want to get to our destination. But you know what we don't think about? We don't think about the flight crew, specifically flight attendants, and the training that you yourself, Julien, has gone through as a flight attendant. Almost we ignore you. Oh, the flight attendant wants me to buckle my seatbelt, man. What is going on here, right? I want to get to Destin and play Margaritaville and drink some margaritas, right? We don't
just
think
want to lean
about
my
the
seat
training.
back half an inch without getting yelled at.
Exactly. So, we just jump on the plane and we take flight attendants for granted, specifically the safety training that they go through. And that's what we're talking about on this episode. We're talking about flight attendants and the safety training that goes into that. But before we get into that, Julien, can you give us a brief history of just the role itself?
Well, the evolution and the glamour of aviation and flight attendants has evolved significantly over time. In the 1930s and 50s, early stewardesses were hired with nursing skills, and they were a glamorized image of aviation, and they were hired with certain age restrictions and weight restrictions and gender requirements. And so the era was much, much different in those days. And then as the industry evolved in the 60s and 70s and 80s, airlines tried to compete with the cruise lines. And so it was what we know as the golden age of aviation, where it was hot meals were served, and they were flight attendants came around the aisle with roasts, and they would slice the roast, and they had salamis and fresh fruits, and people were served similar to like on a cruise ship. And the experience was really elegant and very posh and luxurious. But then in the 19s and the 1990s and the early 2000s, we had increased diversity. It was the end of outdated restrictions and the introduction of a more advanced safety procedures. And so the industry evolved, and they wanted to curb the accidents and incidents. And so this was reflected in the training that flight attendants got. And then post 9/11 to today, flight attendants and the whole aviation industry is more focused on security responsibilities, focused on risk management, conflict de-escalation, medical response, as well as federal regulations. And so the industry has changed a lot over the years. But one thing that I recall strictly was my emergency drills. And we had to go through this over and over again in English and in French in Canada, because those are their two official languages. And we'd say, emergency, bend down, stay down, urgence, penchez-vous, restez penché. And 20 years later, these drills kept coming back into my head. And I would have dreams or nightmares of being called by crew skid to board a flight last minute, and the uniform didn't fit, and I had to scramble for an airport pass, and on and on. And so you dream about all these things 20 years later after you're no longer done the career. And so some of these things really stay with you. And so this is how the training actually has impacted my life. And fortunately, wasn't involved in an aviation accident, but the training was prepared for that. And with Air Transat, our training was 6 weeks, of which half a day was dedicated to cabin service. So this just kind of puts a little bit of perspective on the emphasis that airlines put on flight attendant training and what the passengers perceive.
Well, and that's interesting because Will. I mean, we talk about aviation all the time. That's our pretty much. Me and Will are close in distance from each other, so we hang out and talk about different things in aviation. But it often comes to mind, Will. I've always wanted to be that guy. And Julien, that they give you the responsibility of sitting by the door. Right. I mean, does not everybody here and all the listeners, and the listeners can chime in on this in the comment section, of any aviation enthusiast wants, are you responsible to sit by the door? I don't know what the whole spiel is exactly, Julien, but you ask that person if they're, are you responsible enough to sit by the door? And like, I don't know where you are on that, Will Diener, but or Will,
Yes.
I'm
100%.
100%. Yes. And I know Shae's the same way.
It has happened to me once.
Oh man, I
where
never
I
got
was
to
sitting
do
right
it.
there on the emergency exit road, and the attendant came to me and said, "In the event of emergency, are you prepared to act as the one in charge of this door to get it
And you
open,
stood
to
up and
evacuate onto the wing?"
saluted.
And no, I don't think I was that enthusiastic about it, but in my mind, it definitely, um, it's one of those things. I think it's just one of those primal things as a man where you fantasize about saving everybody, or
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
Obviously, you don't fantasize about an emergency situation of being involved in an aircraft incident, but when you think of modern incidents of solely landing on the Hudson, getting that door open, the raft inflating, and getting
You're
people out the
that
door,
guy. Yeah. You're
um,
that guy.
that would be something crazy. I don't want to compare it to being something awesome or anything, because obviously
Right.
not awesome. But as a man, that does go through your mind.
Yeah, and Shae, I can't ask Julien this question because Julien is the safety guy. He's the dude. But Shae, have you ever got to sit beside the emergency door and been left that responsibility?
No, I've never had that pleasure. I've always tried specifically not to.
I like it.
I usually try to, because usually when I fly, it's mostly to Brazil to see my in-laws, and I try to, because usually with those planes you have the back section, and then there's like that middle area where you have the bathrooms and then the kitchen and all that. But there's usually a large area that's not technically the exit row, but there's a large area in front of you. So
Like
I
a
try to
bulkhead?
choose that section over the exit. Although I will say choosing the exit is wider for that reason. So that would be a good way to, if you're a big and tall someone, it's a good avenue to take to make sure you have the leg room.
It's a good place to be for sure. And Julien, I guess the burning question is, what do flight attendants really do?
Well, typically a day in a flight attendant, or you get a schedule, or you're on call, and then you have to report to the airport an hour and a half before your flight for your briefing. And so for international flights, that briefing is held in the crew room. However, for domestic flights, typically it's on board the aircraft for the sake of efficiency. And flight attendants and the crew will have a briefing on, they'll pick their positions. They'll do a quick review of emergency procedures, emergency equipment that each flight attendant is required to take with in case of an emergency. And these include things like such as a megaphone, a first aid kit, the radio beacon, things like that will help in an emergency evacuation. And they'll quickly do a quick review over evacuation procedures as well as some service. So the order of service items, landing cards, and the movie that's going to be playing, and possibly the meals or special needs passengers. And that's the time that they do the pre-flight checks, which includes making sure that each seat is equipped with an inflatable life vest. And then we'll start with pre-boarding of special needs passengers, elderly families with children, as well as UMs, unaccompanied minors. Yeah. And then we continue briefing and continue the boarding process. And then we close the doors and we push back. And that's when the pilot will say, flight attendants, please arm your doors for and cross-check. And so that's when the flight attendants will arm each door, and then they'll cross-check to make sure the opposite door is armed. And so they arm the door, and you put the little strap across to indicate that the door is armed, meaning that if you pull open the lever, the door will open and the raft will inflate. And keep in mind that those rafts, those slide rafts, they cost about $150,000 to install. And it's a flight attendant's worst nightmare to pop a slide, because that will put the aircraft out of commission for 3 days. So
it's not a matter that it will break, it's just that it takes the plane out of commission for 3 days.
It does, yeah, because you have to do a safety report and disconnect that slide raft and then order a new one and install it, and has to be checked and then put the plane back into commission. So it's not a quick fix by no means. It's a big deal. And for sure, you're going to be called into the office and have a
Hey, what happened?
Exactly.
Do they test those? Like, you know how some businesses have like fire drills, schools have fire drills. Do they ever do that with the rafts?
Yeah, so it is part of the training. So in our case, we had a slide raft installed in the training hangar. And so you would go up a set of stairs, just like in grade school on the playground. You go up the stairs to the slide, and there was a little platform. And one by one, we were able to jump down the slide raft, go wee, and then you land. And it was a lot of fun. We were allowed to do 2 runs, and that's it, because otherwise they would keep us busy all afternoon. And keep in mind, the class had 15 people. So if everybody has to do 2 goes, then you're there for 20 minutes, everybody jumping down. And we did have to sit in the slide raft with our vests. However, they weren't inflated. And so they have the slide raft, and we all have to climb inside and put the vest on and bounce around a little bit. So you kind of get the feel of what it's like to be in a slide raft and sitting and stuff. However, there's some things that were not functional. For an example, the smoke hood. So if there's a fire, you have to fight the fire with a smoke hood. But under real circumstances, the smoke hood is equipped with an oxygen canister, and you have to pull the pin, and that little generator will generate oxygen for you. However, during training, that component is disactivated. And so you put the smoke hood on and then go through the motions of putting out a fire during the training. But in real life, those smoke hoods do have oxygen canisters, and you do have to pull that pin to generate oxygen in order to fight the fire. And keep in mind, the fires on board the aircraft are extremely toxic because of all the materials and a lot of smoke. And so very quickly you get a lot of smoke in the cabin to the point where you can no longer see. Yeah.
And Julien, what is the difference between passenger protection and airline expectations?
Well, the passenger's perception is that flight attendants are there for cabin service and making the travel experience an enjoyable one. And this is why flight attendants often have that very bougie airline voice. But the reality is that flight attendants are there for the safety of passengers and sometimes for the de escalation of conflict resolution, de-escalation of management, emotional management. Travel can be very stressful, especially for people with children or people that don't travel often and they're displaced. They don't know where they're going. It's the first time in an airport. They get lost. They get misconnections. There's a lot of pressures going on. And so passengers often reach out to flight attendants for assurance, for guidance, and I always love giving a guidance to my passengers. As oh, and when you get to Cancun, and don't forget to go to the market and cross the street, and customs is like this, and you can get a cab and go there. And this is how much it costs. So they really ask you a lot of questions, and I always pride myself in knowing the name of the states that we're flying to. So it was Cancun, Quintana Roo, and the other one was Puerto Vallarta, Jalisco, and so you know the states that you're all going to, and using the languages and stuff. So it's a lot of fun. It's a great job, and so anybody that's looking to explore the world and get paid for it, the flight attendant career is the one for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And how has that role changed today?
So today, post-pandemic, most airlines focus on hygiene, conflict handling, mental wellness, the adoption of new technology. The cabins will change a lot with individual screens to panoramic screens. So those are ones that curve right around, particularly for those passengers flying business class. Digital safety manuals, biometrics for crew check-in, and real-time incident reporting, and more inclusive hiring for a gender-neutral uniform. So some airlines are coming in with sneakers for airport crew as well as airline crew, and so that's an effort to make females a little bit. They have to wear, or before they have to wear high heels in the airports. And so now with the sneakers, it's a more gender balanced uniforms. However, I've also heard of some Australian airlines where dudes are allowed to wear makeup and they incorporate diversity in people's backgrounds. So you'll see some changes in flight attendants moving forward, as well as flexible cabin configuration. Some airlines have cargo and passenger configurations, and so there's a separation, a wall that separates the cargo from the passengers, and that wall can be moved. So depending on how much cargo they want to take on a plane, then they have to remove a few seats, and then this wall can be repositioned. So you'll see some of that, and an emphasis on human factors and emotional intelligence, which are key to supporting culturally diverse passengers and the need of our globalization.
So I've got a question about that, about one part of that. The idea of moving that wall around and adding, removing passengers or adding, removing seating, is there, how is that doable on the fly? If I guess,
Okay, so let
aren't
me
there
elaborate.
certain torque
Yes.
specs that the seats have to be buttoned down to as far as
Yeah.
safety is
Yeah.
concerned?
So in the case of a combi, so cargo is typically loaded onto either skids or canisters, these big cargo containers.
Sure.
And so beforehand, the aircraft is designed with the configuration for 2 or 3 canisters, those luggage bins. And so that wall is just snapped into certain positions at the two cargo position or at the 3 cargo position, and they take out the seats, and the seats are just simply snapped in and snapped out. So it takes a couple of hours for a crew of 2 or 3 guys to reconfigure that aircraft. Yeah, and then we can do a flight up north and bring in more cargo versus fewer passengers, and then the plane will go back to its base and then get reconfigured to the original position.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
Julian, before we start to bring her to a close, I do have one quick question. What are 2 or 3 just key massive differences pre and post 9/11 as far as
Well,
flight crew and safety?
for safety, so before 9/11, um, there's less screening and screening for passengers on the screening. But since 9/11, so the TSA has imposed more stricter protocols for hand luggage and this type of stuff. And so there was some talk of having marshals on board, and I think the perception is that some airlines would have marshals, although I haven't seen any on board my own airlines. There's that slight fine line between regulation and imposing safety protocols and keeping in mind the passenger expectations that they want a smooth travel experience and without a lot of inconveniences. And so airlines are stuck in the middle between meeting passengers' expectations and executing the laws imposed by the federal policy, that being the FFA or Transport Canada.
How are cockpit visits done today? Is that only on the ground?
They're not allowed at all. It used to be that you could do cockpit visits. Now they had cockpit doors that are completely reinforced, and now they're coming up with a second door by the galley. So it'd be 2 doors, one for the cockpit and 1 door for the galley. I don't know exactly when those doors are going to be imposed, but it means that they have to reconfigure those walls and make
Sure.
sure that there's some type of access protocol, which complicates things yet a second time. So as soon as you put in one protocol, it means that you have to adapt the new protocols to access that area.
Sure. Access protocols being in the event of like a medical emergency within the cockpit or a fire in the cockpit or something like that.
Oh, well, that kind of things. But in some cabins, you have business class, and then you have a galley, and then you have a washroom, and then you have the cockpit. And so, in order for the business class passengers, they would have to access the washroom, and so they may have to go through that first door, which kind of creates a breach. And if you have the galley on one side, then having flight attendants going in and out of the galley into the cabin, going through the secure door that's open 300 times in a flight, kind of creates a lot of vulnerability points,
Yeah,
which
and
kind
a
of
little bit of
compromises the whole.
frustration, I'd imagine too.
Yeah, and which creates a lot of vulnerability points, which compromises the whole point of having a secure door.
Yeah,
Understood.
and Julian, the sole reason that you ended up as a regular co-host on this podcast was with talks on some of the books that you wrote. So, your books cover all things pretty much, careers in aviation. But tell us a little bit about what your books cover as far as if someone wants to become a flight attendant specifically.
Well, fair enough. And that's a very good question. And for that, I've come up with this book, which is called The Ultimate Guide to Careers in Aviation. And so it explores all kinds of careers, specifically the 4 career categories of keen interest to the aviation industry, that being pilot, air traffic controller, aviation management, and aircraft engineering. And so it lays out a little bit about the demand and the changes in airport operations as well as airline operations, and how the next generation can fit in more smoothly in getting and launching a career in aviation. And that leads me to my second book, Mediocrity is Killing Your Superpower, which is a motivational book based on my TED Talk, Mediocrity is Killing Your Superpower. And it talks about role models, female role models, how to strive for excellence, and what do you do? What does the industry do when you're not able to achieve excellence? For an example, if there's an accident, how do you come out of it? And in your personal life, how to improve your own standards so that you can achieve excellence. And we talk about some of the details in that. So these two books are available on Amazon, and I have more coming up. So stay tuned, and I'll let you know when the next books come out.
That'll be
Awesome.
exciting. And JulienMartinson.com, that will be in the description below. And you can also, those books are available on Amazon as well, correct, Julian?
That's correct.
And all things History of Aviation podcast. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok. We got the shorts going on TikTok, guys. How exciting is that? We got the shorts and the full podcast, Shae, over on YouTube. So you can get actually on YouTube, if I understand correctly, you can get the audio podcast. You can get the full video podcast as well as the shorts.
Yeah, it took us a little bit to realize, but we realized that the podcast was getting shared with YouTube, just the audio version, and then I would go right behind it and upload the video version. So I created two playlists, one being the audio and the other one being the video. That way, if you want one or the other, you just click on whichever playlist you want and just go with that. Because sometimes you want to watch, and other times you just want to listen.
Yeah, exactly. And then that's the service that we give here. Watch, listen, shorts, bloopers. We've got blooper reels, which we always come up with plenty of those. But Julian, thanks so much for all the. What's that? Some golf videos. Yeah, golf videos.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
That was exciting and fun. So yeah, Julian, man, I appreciate the info. I don't know much about airlines, and you're always bringing something to the table about airlines that I didn't know. So I not only do I host this podcast, but I also learn from it.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me on the show. It's truly a distinguished pleasure.
So this is where we give a salute to flight attendants and what they do. And thank you all flight attendants for your service.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right on.
And Julien, thank you so much for your insight and your knowledge.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure.
For Will D., Julien Martinson, Shae Jones producing, I'm Derrick Beeler. Thanks for listening to History of Aviation Podcast.